the Jordan River. A 200-mile border separating the present-day Kingdom of Jordan from Israel and the West Bank. In 1400 BC, this waterway represented one of the final obstacles to the wandering Israelites' long-awaited entrance into the Promised Land.
The Ark of the Covenant comes into its own when Joshua was given the task of leading Israel across the Jordan River. And the story is that the Ark of the Covenant would go first and be carried into the Jordan River.
Some energy came forth from the ark, causing the waters to literally stop and ascend, and therefore creating dry land for the entire children of Israel to pass on off into the Holy Land.
But if this biblical story is true, what kind of power could the Ark of the Covenant have possessed that would cause a raging river to stand still?
What if the people who wrote these stories were simply reporting on what they were actually seeing? If that's true, then the Ark of the Covenant clearly represents a technology that is more advanced than anything we have now.
If you want to part water, maybe a good way to do it would be with high-speed winds. Because if you blow enough air, you can get the water out of the way, and you can actually maybe even form those two walls of water.
There's some kind of technology that they're using, and it's so that they can accomplish their goals and continue on their journey, and they're able to use this extraterrestrial technology to do it.
According to the Bible's book of Joshua, the Ark of the Covenant once again proved a powerful ally when the Israelites arrived on the western banks of the Jordan River, set on conquering the seemingly impenetrable walled city of Jericho.
The reputation of the Israelites preceded them. People were terrified. They ever heard the rumors of the power of this great and awesome ark. They now come to the city of Jericho. The people were commanded by God to march around the city walls.
They march around the city once on the first day. The next day they do the very same thing. The third, fourth, fifth, and sixth day it's the same thing. On the seventh day, they march around and then they blow the trumpets and all the people shout.
Between the marching of the feet, the sounding of the ram's horns, the shofar, and with some power not described from the ark, it enabled the big stone mighty walls of the city of Jericho to somehow be vibrated with a earthquake-type force, which caused them to collapse.
When I hear that they had to walk around Jericho 7 times, and then the trumpets were the ones that allowed for those walls to crumble, one would have to ask yourselves, was there something else to it?
Knocking something down like a wall with pressure is not inconceivable. So you could imagine trying to do this. Now, when you look at things, think of standard examples that we experience. When the space shuttle lands, we get the sonic boom. And you can feel it rattling the walls, and you can actually hear it. That's far away. Imagine getting a sonic boom closer to the object. You might be able to do significant damage to the wall.
The methods used to build huge megalithic structures such as Pumapunku and the pyramids of Egypt remain a mystery. But what about the tools used to build them? Where are they? And might they provide a clue as to how these enormous stone structures were created?
A lot of the real ancient, mysterious work was done at a time when there was no steel. And the copper they had was, yeah, they could harden it by cold hammering it, but still wouldn't make a dent in rocks like basalt and granite. So they would have had to use, much more labor's techniques or they had some sort of advanced technology which escapes me. And I've been in the business 40 years.
The tools and machines must have been equal to the task of actually building the pyramids, crafting those statues to such a high order of precision, crafting those boxes to a modern-day precision that we find in our inspection lab. And the big question, where are the tools?
In the late 19th century, British archaeologist Sir Flinders Petrie scoured Egypt, looking not for the biggest items, but the smallest.
Petrie was absolutely fascinated by the technical achievements of the Egyptians, particularly the early Egyptians. He constantly was looking for how they made things, how they developed things, how they continued to sort of basically perfect their tools.
We're normally taught that the ancient Egyptians had simple tools, and what Petrie brought out is information that seems to actually argue against that notion.
This is an example of a drill hole. You can see the very fine lines on it. You can see the technology that's made to use it. You can see how it's a perfect hole almost all the way through, but it tapers at one end. This is the fragment of a diorite bowl. It's one of the hardest substances, and you can see on this fragment that there's a lathe mark, which is really interesting that they managed to make such a mark in such a hard material.
Among all the tools discovered by Petrie, however, one stood out from all the rest. While working inside the Great Pyramid, Petrie stumbled across a tubular drill made of granite.
Tubular drills amongst the ancient Egyptians were actually fairly common. I mean, Petrie found quite a few of them. The interesting thing about the one that he found in Giza is that such hard stone that was so carefully curved, precisely grooved. As you can see, it's got very, very fine markings on it, basically lines, literally a couple of millimeters apart. You can see it goes all the way around, very, very accurately, hardly any waves at all. He was absolutely amazed by this. He kept returning to it throughout his life. His theory was that the Egyptians must have had access to diamonds or some kind of jewel that would have cut it. The interesting thing about Petrie's theory about how these drill lines were made was that he never discovered any diamonds in ancient Egypt. So where were they? Where did they go? We don't know.
If the ancient Egyptians didn't possess diamonds, how were the precision grooves cut onto the granite drill? Did Petrie accidentally discover a tool made by extraterrestrials? Machinist expert Chris Dunn attempted to answer this question by creating his own granite drill, using the known tools and techniques of the ancient Egyptians.
In order to test the Egyptologist theory about how the ancient Egyptians drilled into granite, I took a tube and fixed a crank on it and actually used sand and silicon carbide. And after many hours of turning and drilling into this piece of granite, finally got deep enough that I could actually pop a core out. And the reason for that was to actually look at the surface, not just of the hole, but of the core.
The next step was to use a high-tech industrial microscope to compare his drill core to a latex copy of the one at the Petrie Museum.
We have under the microscope the core that we drilled with the copper tube and sand. And as you can see, the surface of the core, the striations are not very clear. There's nothing really distinctive in terms of the feed of the tool marks. using sand and copper. Now, bringing the latex that they took of the core in the Petrie Museum, and we see something totally different. The striations are very clear, and they're quite deep. The devil is actually in the details, and the details of this particular artifact are what I consider to be a smoking gun in terms of what level of technology we give the ancient Egyptians credit for.
Did aliens really inspire our ancestors to build ancient temples and pyramids? And if they came here, did they leave behind any advanced knowledge of physics, astronomy, or mathematics? If so, is there any evidence that remains to this day? One example might be this one. Often described as the world's first mechanical computer, it dates back over 2,000 years.
The Antikythera device was found in 1900 by sponge divers diving off a small island in the Aegean called Antikythera. There was a shipwreck there, and in it was a coral-encrusted box, and it was made of metal alloys. And it then went to the Athens Museum, where a good 50 years later, they were able to X-ray this box, and they were able to discern cogged wheels that were interconnected and give us a very good depiction of what this thing was. And it is a computer. It's a really sophisticated machine.
It's a very interesting piece of technology because it served two purposes. One was that it was an astronomical device where you could, by using it, chart your position to the stars and navigate your way through the seas. It was also an astrological device so that someone could tell you, if you were born on this date and your planet sign is this, then certain things are going to happen to you when the planets are in this alignment. So it was a very interesting piece of technology that literally had more complicated gears and inner workings than a modern-day Swiss watch. And it's found to be dated, I think, like 200 BC, so it's really an anomaly as to who could have created that and what it was being used for.
When archaeologists first started to examine this thing in the 1950s, they said that they never could conceive of the ancient Greeks having such complicated machinery. And in fact, they said this was tantamount to finding a jet airplane in the tomb of King Tut.
Even older than the Antikythera mechanism are these carvings on a wall at the Dendera temple complex in Egypt. To some, the strange designs look eerily similar to objects very much in use today.
In Egypt, there is this underground crypt at Dendera that was always secret, and only the high priests had access to that crypt. And it's very hot in there, very narrow, low ceiling, and on the walls you have these reliefs of what looks like ancient light bulbs. Because we have to question one thing: how did the ancient Egyptians light the inside of their tombs?
According to most mainstream archaeologists, torches were used by the ancient Egyptians to light the pitch-black chambers of tombs and temples. Yet nowhere on the ceilings is there even the slightest evidence of soot or smoke residue.
There isn't enough oxygen inside those tombs with which to support or feed a flame of a torch. The only remaining solution is by some sort of an artificial light source. And that is, for example, a light bulb. So at an underground crypt at Dendera, we find reliefs of such light bulbs.
But how could the ancient Egyptians have used anything resembling a modern-day light bulb without access to electricity. After all, electricity wouldn't be discovered for thousands of years. That is, of course, with the exception of what scientists call the Baghdad Battery.
The Baghdad Battery was discovered in ancient Iraq. Scholars today say there's no way that ancient man was using electricity or light bulbs. So they look at this Baghdad Battery, and there's about a dozen of them that have been found in Iraq. And the only mainstream theory is that they were using it for electroplating jewelry.
Two major proponents of ancient alien theory, Jason Martel and Georgios Tsoukalos, demonstrate just how the Baghdad Battery could generate electricity using a modern mock-up of the device.
Well, basically this is made out of a clay pot, clay just found naturally in that region in southern Iraq. And then they would use a small copper lining and something along the lines of an asphalt stopper wrapped around an iron rod. And these all applied together, and the combination of some weak acetic acid, vinegar, grape juice, orange juice in this case, wine, would be able to generate a charge by combining these elements with the iron rod and the copper, and the combination of that creates an abundance of electricity. So what we're gonna do is basically just fill the clay pot with some orange juice here. I'll try not to spill it too much. Okay. And then we'll go ahead and put the copper rod back in there. Copper and iron rod. We'll give it a moment to kind of fill that copper area there. And then by turning on the voltmeter and applying this to each side, we should be able to generate a charge. And there it goes, into the positive. And if we give it some time to get the electrolytes really buzzing in there, you'll see that this volt will actually continue to rise.
It is a battery, everybody agrees with that, but nobody knows why they made it and how they made it. What mind would think of that? You know, electrical current backed several thousand years ago? It's very strange, but it's clearly a battery.
The whole idea that ancient civilizations actually had knowledge of electricity and used electricity is an accepted archaeological fact today. Just like in our own civilization, where about 200 years ago, Benjamin Franklin and other scientists began experimenting with simple electrical devices, we now have evidence that over 3,000 years ago, people were also experimenting with electrical devices.
In today's largest construction sites and quarries, huge mega machines are used to dig, cut, and lift stone. These man-made creatures dwarf their creators and perform the work of thousands of men using modern hydraulic technologies. Without such equipment, builders could never construct modern skyscrapers. Yet thousands of years ago, ancient civilizations were accomplishing the same work while constructing their monuments and temples using massive stones. These enormous blocks, many weighing in excess of 100 tons, would be a challenge even for today's engineers. Yet thousands of years ago, people cut them out of solid rock, transported them for miles, and then lifted them precisely into place. But how? Did they cut these massive stone blocks with hammers, chisels, and copper wire, as mainstream archaeologists suggest? Could they have lifted and transported them without a pulley system or the wheel? Or did ancient civilizations possess advanced technologies that have since been lost to science?
At Giza, you just don't have the pyramids. Linked to the pyramids are what Egyptologists call valley temples. It doesn't take a rocket engineer that when you go there, there's something not quite right here. Whereas the pyramids are built with blocks of 2 to 3 tons, these temples, which are minute compared to the pyramids, are built with blocks of 100 tons, and some of them 200 tons. Now, let me tell you what a 100-ton block is. If you take 100 family cars and you squeeze them together, you get one of these blocks. First of all, let alone how they move these blocks, is why would they want to use 100-ton blocks? It simply doesn't make sense.
There's no reason for them to want to build out of granite blocks the size of a semi-truck. It's like, okay, let's do something, but let's do it as difficult as we could possibly do it.
The reason why I am convinced that sophisticated technology was utilized in these ancient rocks is because if we go to a stone quarry today and look at the scope of machinery required to accomplish similar things, those machines are huge.
Subscribers to Ancient Alien Theory do not believe extraterrestrials built these amazing monuments, but instead provided some type of technological know-how or tools to our ancestors. Engineering expert Chris Dunn has spent several decades researching the construction tools used by the ancient Egyptians.
We're normally taught by Egyptologists that the ancient Egyptians had simple tools. They went to work every day using stone balls, copper chisels, a copper tube and sand to grind holes in diorite and granite, extremely hard rock. From what I have actually gathered over the years is information that seems to actually argue against that notion that they had simple tools.
In Egypt, Dunn was able to examine ancient sites firsthand. What he found has proved to be both revolutionary and controversial.
If you look at the Giza Plateau and all the stones that they actually placed in the Great Pyramid and Khafre's Pyramid and Menkaura's Pyramid, 2.5 million blocks of stone in the Great Pyramid alone. They had to have had some efficient means of cutting them to size and putting them into place. They had to have had somebody on site who's saying, okay, I need a block this size, and then getting a block to them that size, stat, like immediately.
While searching several miles north of Giza at Abu Ruwash, Dunn stumbled upon a clue when he spotted a granite block containing a deep cut.
When I first saw it, I just didn't know what to make of it. And it was only after puzzling over it for days and sometimes waking up at 3 o'clock in the morning, scratching my head and thinking, well, how did they make this cut? And finally to realize that the only way that they could have actually cut that thing was with a saw that was 35 feet in diameter.
The idea that ancient Egyptians used giant saws provoked much resistance from mainstream archaeologists. Dunn, however, was convinced.
As an ex-machinist, I look for tool marks. I look for them everywhere I go. And I could be accused of, well, you know, if you're going to look for something, you're probably going to find it because you're looking at it through a certain filter. Accepted, I agree. But the question is, why is it there? Clearly, to me, that is a machine mark. But there were no machines back then. So what do? I just go looking for more machine marks, and they're all over the place. You find them on statues, you'll find them particularly in the Luxor Museum. There seems to be an impression on the side of Amun's buttock where it meets the bench, where there is an undercut. It was the slip of a tool, and therefore it must have been a tool that was quite efficient.
In the early morning hours of November 5th, 2005, the luxury cruise ship, the Seabourn Spirit, found itself under attack by pirates in the waters off the coast of Somalia. But the Somali bandits were successfully repelled by a relatively new and formidable defensive weapon, a long-range acoustic device, or LRAD. Manufactured by the LRAD Corporation, this sonic device can, when focused on a target, produce a piercing sound that can exceed 150 decibels, enough to cause temporary blindness, nausea, and permanent hearing loss.
The U.S. Army used sonic weapons in Iraq. They're used in crowd control. There are certain types of low rumbles and signals that will affect a person. They make you feel sick.
The LRAD is currently used by law enforcement, the military, and private security, and is considered the ultimate in sonic weaponry. But is the LRAD really a 21st century invention? Or is there evidence that similar audio weapons existed in ancient times? Approximately 17 miles northeast of Jerusalem lies the ancient ruins of the city of Jericho. Here, archaeologists have uncovered evidence of settlements dating back to 9000 BC. According to the Hebrew Bible, Jericho is believed to be where God spoke to Joshua, the successor to Moses, and instructed him to march around the walled city once every 6 days with 7 priests carrying ram's horns, and followed by the Ark of the Covenant, the golden chest containing the 10 Commandments. Then, on the 7th day, under orders by God, Joshua and the Israelites marched around the perimeter of the city one last time. But this time, they blew the ram's horns. The walls of Jericho fell, and the city was sacked.
In the Old Testament, you see very clear descriptions in Joshua 6 about the shofar, which is described as a trumpet that was used in the Battle of Jericho to actually bring the walls down.
To religious scholars, the collapse of Jericho's walls was a miracle. To most modern-day scientists and historians, the destruction was most probably caused by an earthquake. But could it have been something else? Could the Israelites have possessed advanced sound wave technology? If so, where did it come from?
In the scriptures, we have a fascinating story about the fall of the walls of Jericho. Armies were told to circle the wall repeatedly and then finally blow their horns, and down came the walls. And we know there was a powerful presence, the Ark of the Covenant. This mysterious sacred item was with them at all times, which of course was part of the event and part of the fall of the walls of Jericho.
The idea that some kind of sonic weapon was used to destroy these huge, thick, ancient walls to allow the Israelites to basically take over that city is a fascinating one. So what kind of technology were they using? It sounds utterly fantastic to us that they could have had some kind of advanced alien technology. It's clearly what they're describing.
There is little doubt that the Ark of the Covenant was a weapon. It was described as a weapon. Famously, when the Israelites crossed over into Canaan, they had to pass by Jericho. And it could be that there was some technology. We do not know what that technology was, but there was clearly an association between the Ark and the falling down of the walls, and that's the reason that the Ark was sent around the periphery of the city.
According to many ancient astronaut theorists, Moses and the Israelites acquired a supernatural source of energy at Mount Sinai. This powerful energy source was later contained in the Ark of the Covenant and would have provided the kind of power necessary to amplify Joshua's horns and make them into a powerful sonic weapon.
What's interesting about the Battle of Jericho is that this particular use of the shofar clearly seems to be the same thing that we're seeing with particle beam technology, death ray technology, thunderbolt technology. It very clearly seems that once again we have an extraterrestrial technology that the ancient people had at the ready that they could use when needed for military campaigns.
The Andes Mountains, Peru. Here, 12 miles north of Pumapunku, lie the murky waters of Lake Titicaca, the largest lake in South America. According to local legends, the god Viracocha rose up from the depths of this lake to create the sun, the stars, and mankind.
Legend states that Viracocha, the great creator god of the Inca and the prehistoric civilization of that area, emerged from Lake Titicaca. He went to Tiwanaku and brought civilization to that part of the world. He then went to Pumapunku, and this is where he said he made men and women from stone and took them to the four corners of the earth to spread their seed.
The Spanish conqueror asked the Inca, the people living there, including the king of the Inca, what is this Pumapunku? And they all said, it's not us. It's not our forefather who made this. This were made by the gods in one single night. Usually a king is proud about what his people did, about the precision and so on. In that case, the chief and the people said, no, it was not us. It was the gods who made it.
One of the legends of Pumapunku states that it was built by a race of giants in one night after a great cataclysm and flood had destroyed the whole area. But what's really interesting is that who were these giants? Where did they come from? Was it Viracocha and his band of followers, or was it some other beings from some other place?
One of the earliest chronicles that we have in regards to Pumapunku talks about that these giant platforms were moved through the air by the sound of a trumpet. They basically floated into place. So do we have some type of sound technology here? And the answer is a potential yes.
Might the legends of giants and stones floating through the air have been inspired by some sort of mysterious events in the distant past? Or were they the result of alien beings visiting Earth in prehistoric times, as ancient astronaut theorists believe?
Now I come with a speculation. Extraterrestrials arrive, the spaceship stands in orbit. Only a smaller space vehicle comes down like a space shuttle. So, just to protect their instruments, they make overnight, with their technology, what we call a base camp. Of course made out of stones found on Earth, because you don't transport granite or diorite from another solar system. And then they disappear. But the wall of their base camp is still there. Now the natives come. They see these ruins. They touch it with their fingers. They say, look at this, it's so smooth, it's so sharp. The gods did it. The place becomes a holy place. And now the natives start to construct temples, altars in honor of the gods. So you have two technologies. One was an extraterrestrial technology, and the other was the humans with their altars and their temples.
Luxor, Egypt. Here, along the east bank of the Nile River, lie the archaeological remains of the vast Karnak temple complex, dating to the 32nd century BC. With its numerous structures, including great halls, obelisks, and an avenue of sphinxes, Karnak represents the combined achievement of many generations of Egypt's ancient builders.
When one travels to Luxor and gazes upon the Karnak temple, we see large pillars, oversized obelisks, and what's very amazing about this area is that it's one of the few places where over 30 pharaohs contributed to its sheer size and wealth of knowledge over a vast period of time.
For centuries, archaeologists and scholars have considered Karnak to be one of the most dramatic examples of the remarkable technological ability of early man. But do the construction techniques used in building these incredible monuments reveal evidence of something more, something not of this earth.
When we start looking at hieroglyphs, we are amazed as to how beautiful and how carefully they have been carved. The technology which we see is clearly of a perfection which is beautiful and almost makes our heart cry whenever you come face to face with it.
Experts believe the most impressive evidence of advanced machining can be found on Karnak's tall, four-sided tapering monuments called obelisks.
The obelisk is carved with the same inscriptions on four sides, and they're all exactly the same, and they're beautifully cut and articulated hieroglyphs into this red granite stone.
We would look at it today and say it had to be some sort of machine that carved these things out. For example, there were slots. They were only 0.14 inches wide, ½ inch deep. When you look inside, you can see the bottom of them were made by a rotating tool. So this was a tool that punched in, came out, stepped down, punched in, came out. The human hand, no matter how good you are, can never do that. The tool marks themselves, the precision, the depth, the rotating impressions that were made were not done by hand. Some of those were so precisely engraved as to require machine tools to do it. The toolkit that we see that the ancient Egyptians were supposed to use, there's no way that any of those tools could produce the results that we saw.
To many scholars, the apparent precision used in the construction of the obelisks at Karnak suggests a 21st century level of expertise.
Precision is what our civilization is built on. To craft something to within 2/10,000ths of an inch or 1,000th of an inch is quite common today because that tolerance or that precision is necessary and it has purpose.
But how can we explain such precision in ancient construction?
If you look at the Ramses statue, it is so perfect that you wonder how this was even done with allegedly primitive tools, because today we could only do this with machines.
So the way we check the symmetry of the Ramses statue is to take two images, the same photographs, make transparencies, and compare the left to the right. We flip it over and bring it over the original. And as we can see, we have a perfect match. The ancient Egyptians were very skilled at working granite. I cannot see how they could have created what they created with the tools that are commonly accepted to have been in the ancient Egyptians' toolbox, such as copper chisels, or stone chisels, wooden mallets, stone balls.
But if, as many historians and archaeologists contend, the ancient builders did not possess the equivalent of modern tools, how were these monuments built with such mathematical precision? Perhaps the answer can be found by comparing an example of ancient sculpture with one made by more modern methods.
We can compare the aluminum model, the face machine, the striations coming down the face with the striations coming down the face of the statue of Karnak in Egypt. And also the tool marks, so where we see above the eyebrow, the dig-in right there, where it kind of shows us what kind of tools or the shape of the tools that they used. So the elements that bring this machining to ancient statue are not just the symmetry, but also the geometry, the precision, and the tool marks. And we have all three elements in modern machining and ancient statuary. It's an enormously difficult thing to do by hand without introducing some mechanical assistance. Seems to me to be impossible.
But if the tool marks seen on the Ramses statue appear identical to those made by modern methods, wouldn't it prove that the ancient builders had access to machines, and perhaps even electricity?
They allegedly did not have electricity, power tools. Supposedly they didn't have diamond saws. But yet, they're doing things that would require precision work, precision tools. So where did they get those things? How could they have had these advanced machining tools that we've only just acquired ourselves today in our civilization? So one answer would have to be they've gotten it from ancient aliens.
In the center of the temples at Tiwanaku lie the ruins of a stone arch called the Gateway of the Sun. Cut and shaped from a single andesite stone, weighing more than 10 tons, archaeologists believe the 10-foot-tall, 13-foot-wide megalith was once the gateway leading to Pumapunku.
The Gateway of the Sun is probably the entrance, or one of the entrances, to the Pumapunku temple. And as such, it's very important because this is how the people of Tiwanaku conducted their ritual, by funneling people through increasingly smaller gateways and stairways to more and more sacred precincts.
On the upper portion of the arch, intricate carvings can be found of nearly 50 winged beings on either side of what is believed to be the great creator god Viracocha. Interpretations of the engravings suggest they refer to a calendar describing a time as far back as 27,000 BC.
So here we are at the famous Gate of the Sun with Viracocha right in the middle, holding two scepters, surrounding by birdmen.
That's a common depiction in ancient societies, is a man who's able to fly. That would have probably been an interpretation by the native people of someone coming from the sky or from the heavens.
It's part of our idea, too, that some giant airship that was a factory with power tools and power saws and routers and drills just landed here and began processing these giant blocks of stone and then ultimately created Pumapunku.
It seems like the whole complex was some kind of technological kind of factory. And if my research is correct, it looks like they were using it to create energy of some sort. So what some people suggest is that they were using electricity and power tools, which sounds incredible when we think about it because they're a modern invention. But actually, if you look at the quality of the stonework, you have to admit something like that was going on there.
When you look at the complexity of Pumapunku, the huge platforms, the interlocking blocks that was made into what they thought were indestructible walls, what you could have is the kind of perfectly made granite spaceport that extraterrestrials would want.